I'd like to welcome everybody to the panel on digital culture from the east of Europe, which sort of turned more into the question of video game development in Central and Eastern Europe. I'd like to welcome all panelists. To do it with some sort of equality, I'll just present them in the order they are sitting. Dan Dimitrescu, Killhouse Games, the creator of the tactical game Door Kickers, formerly also of Ubisoft Romania, where he worked, for example, on the Silent Hunter series. And mainly, if you try to Google Dan, you will probably get most results dealing with the subsim community. Tom Putzki, who works in Wargaming, a company, I don't know if I have to present it, is one of the few individual companies that have TV ads in Poland. Wargaming, the authors of World of Tanks. And Tom also has an interesting past, so to say, because he's one of the co-founders of Piranha Bytes and the creator of a cult game, Gothic, especially cult in Central and Eastern Europe. So right now working for a Belarusian company. This is one Eastern Europeanness that Tom got into, and the other is the popularity of Gothic. Sosowski, sometimes known as Mikołaj Kamiński, but it's just an urban legend. His actual name is Sosowski. One of the craziest and wildest indie game developers in the region and possibly in the world. Right now working on the worst game in the world, Mosh Pit Simulator. And Maciej Miąsik, one of the most experienced Polish video games developers, sometimes known as the Pope of Polish game development. One of the first people, interestingly, who were trying to, in Poland, who were trying to sell their video games abroad, so a pioneer in this respect. And then creator or co-creator of many games, including at some point the first part of The Witcher, for instance. Right now an independent game developer. And my name is Pavel Schreiber. I'm a video game critic and a lecturer at Kazimierz Wielki University in Bydgoszcz. And I'd like to start this discussion with a set of memes and quotations. One of the first inspirations for this panel was, I don't know if any of you have seen it, but during the discussions after the launch of BioWare's not really hit Mass Effect Andromeda, there were these comparisons. Sos thinks it's a good game, yes. There were comparisons of graphics. On the one side, you would have a character from Mass Effect Andromeda with his strange facial expressions and not really well done eyes. And on the other hand, on the other side, you had Geralt the Witcher from The Witcher 3. On the one side, you had on the Mass Effect Andromeda side, you had $40 to $50 million budget, and on the other side, vodka and Slavic magic. There was another variant of this meme. Okay, this is Sos is showing it, if you can see it. There was another variant of this meme, also 40 to 50 million budget, and a bunch of crazy Slavs on the side of The Witcher. And this got me thinking, because of course the meme is quite obviously absurd. If the production budget of Mass Effect Andromeda was around $40 million, so was the production budget of The Witcher 3, and the promotion budget of The Witcher 3 was another 40 million. So basically we're speaking about a similar budget level. Also a huge corporation, but still there is this stereotype clinging to the Eastern European product, right? A bunch of people working for next to no money and doing miracles. And then I was trying to look for some inspirational quotes dealing with the attitude of the Western video game critics and gamers towards Eastern European game development. And I came up with stuff like this. Duncan Fife, back then writing on his blog Hit Self-Destruct, writing about Russian games, most importantly about the game Pathologic. These games are a culture shock from a place where apparently technical standards are not so rigorously enforced, but they serve as cultural ambassadors regardless for the good and the bad, inducting players into an alien culture, some nebulous Eastern European thing where rewards are foreign and punishment is habitual. Toby McCasker, in his article on IGN.com, The Witcher 3 and the Eastern European Difference. Eastern Europe has been damaged so thoroughly by human history, its collective existential philosophy is unknowable by the standards of the rest of the world. This written by an Australian. Japan may be the only functioning post-apocalyptic society in the world, but Eastern Europe's apocalypse is perpetual, right? We're living in the apocalypse here. There is something ramshackle yet bottomless there that echoes the stoic cities of Kiev and Krakow, that is in the meta-description of the metros and stalkers. The omnipresent dread everyone has learned to live with. This is how we live in Eastern Europe. Where America looks to the bombast bayism and Japan covets cartoonish bosoms, Eastern Europe likes books. The Witcher 3's menaces are ripped straight from post-medieval folklore most will know little of, and the Wild Hunt itself is a myth of the dead and gone's unseen epilogue. All throughout Europe, stories have always taught, stories have always healed. Right here it's the exotic Europe that is still reading books. One more comment. I think it's the cold vodka and the overall depressing demeanor that explains the Eastern European games, right? So this is the kind of attitude that you get, sometimes stemming from laziness and sometimes stemming from the desire to add some local color. Whenever you have a high-profile account of Eastern European game development, when it's in Poland, it will usually start with a description of the Warsaw Uprising. When it's in Russia, it will start with the devastation of communism and the people living in the apocalypse. And I'd like to start with this. To what extent these stereotypes of the long-suffering Eastern Europe that is able to produce different games because of this suffering, for one thing, and the other stereotype, the miracle doers who live on next to nothing, who work on tiny budgets, who get drunk all the time, and who are able to produce miraculous games. To what extent do you think, or how would you comment on these stereotypes?
So if I may begin still referring to that image that you described of Mass Effect Andromeda having a budget, and then Witcher was just made with like Slavic vodka and magic, which is obviously not true, because Witcher 3, I'm pretty sure it had substantially larger budget than Mass Effect. But even if the budget was the same, the thing is that the wages here are quite lower. So like if Mass Effect Andromeda has 50 million budgets, that's about like 3 years of 50 people's work. But then for the same money in Poland, you can hire 150 people for the same amount of time. So basically, you get more work you get more done, and you get a bigger, like a higher production value game out of the same things. So that's not stereotypes, that's not myths, that's just numbers.
Okay, in a way. Yes, any other comments or?
But of course we are better, more talented, stronger. We want to deliver that message at any chance we have. But this is we don't differ that much, really. Although when I remember my cooperation with the French developers, I think we really work much harder than them, at least for French people. But I don't see really the difference in a way we work, because if you know a lot of Western developers, you know that they work really hard, because this is pretty hard business anyway. So it's not we are not special in this regard, but if we can, we should always tell that we are special, because it will help us. And we want to conquer the world and be the best, game development imperium in the world.
So we are special, definitely, and I like the quote with the books, and I think there is a core of truth in this, because I'm doing this game development stuff since 25 years now, and I learned to know that especially US developed games are in a way like US developed movies or TV shows, easy to grab, and when I started, it was the magical 15 minutes that a game needs to, in this time, the game should convince and grab the player, and nowadays we have like 15 seconds, something like this, especially in the mobile business or stuff, and so what this US developed games always needed is present everything from the very first second to the gamer, to the recipient. And I remember the times when we got our first reviews from US or English-speaking journalists forgot. Wow, that was not me.
This was the US reviewers.
Yep, exactly. And at this time, we got the same quotes as for example, The Witcher got. A game with a story, with not very accessible. You could die easily if you go in the wrong direction, and so on and so on. And yeah, the controls were shit. I remember very well. But the idea of people playing games and trying to work for their fun and their effort, not in a bad way, but really, it's all about blood, sweat, and tears at these times, and I personally like it very much.
Yeah, I just wanted to confirm the myth about working for no money, because actually when we started Door Kickers, we didn't get any wages, of course, because it was our company, so there was no point in paying ourselves salaries. But when I remember my early years in the games industry, there was not much payment involved, but I was mostly a student, so I thought it was great money back then. Now that I have a family and kids and everything, I couldn't do it that way. Now, about the games industry, East European games industry compared to the US one, I grew up with early American titles, and I'd say they were more experimental back then. But nowadays, they the companies that remained are more professional. They know exactly what they need to put out. They work especially for the American market, which is actually even for us the biggest market. So they do it the right way. Some of them are more commercial. Some of them are at the borderline between an indie hit and a commercial one. I think the European titles and East European titles that managed to make some waves are especially the ones that are not fighting the same battle as the Americans. I mean, if you're trying to beat the big games at their own game, you won't be able to do it. I think it's the same for European cinema. Whenever European cinema gathers all their forces together and they try to do a big hit, with lots of visual effects, something is not clicking. It's kind of crap, And when they try to do an artistic film, maybe it comes out better. On the other hand, us with Door Kickers, we just try to do a game, nothing European specific about it. but maybe because it's not mass market, nobody in America wants to do something like that. I remember exactly that nobody wanted to do Silent Hunter anymore, so we did it in Europe. So it's just the subject that we touch, maybe that makes it special.
One more thing I wanted to add, that I think you mentioned that in some of your quotes about the communism, the apocalypse that we still have. So the thing is, even when we broke out of communism, like Poland, and I believe like all of the Eastern European post-communism bloc countries, were really behind in terms of technology, which allowed us. So I know like Maciej was making games when I wasn't even born yet, but I'm fairly young generation of game developers, but I had a chance. The games that I grew up with and the games that the computers that I had contact with in the 90s when I was a kid growing up, these were computers and games from the 80s. They were already outdated. We had the Famiclones, Pegasus, that had all the Nintendo games, whilst our like siblings from the Western countries already had 16-bit games, already had like the first PlayStations. That was like 94, and only then the Pegasus and like the Commodore 64 started getting really popular, really affordable in Poland for people to get. So then you get a lot of people who are kind of, they have this education of going through this, which is, my siblings from the Western world, the Americas, the England, Germany, they don't know how to like things like Commodore 64, things like tapes, things like basic language, things like assembly language, things like making pixel art back in the days where you had to draw it on a paper and then input it by hand into computer, converting into numbers. This is all alien to them. This is a thing they have never experienced. Well, a lot of people here in Poland have gone through that, and in Eastern Europe as well. So I guess we might benefit from that a lot. And also the kind of games we grew up with are the different kind of games. Like, do you know, there's a series of games, of 8-bit games called Dizzy. Who knows Dizzy, the game? A lot of people. If I said Dizzy, like anywhere in the West, people don't know that game. The game about egg. It was popular only here.
And interestingly enough, the first games you feature as your games on your website are Commodore 64 games, made in what, 2000 something?
Well, making games for Commodore 64 is fun as hell. So I still sometimes make one or two.
And it's interesting because the Commodore 64 was not really the kind of computer that you would have in Poland in the 80s. If you had a computer in the 80s, it would be 8-bit Atari. And C64 was a bit too upper shelf for that, and then it's I wouldn't say that it got a very big second life in Poland, because not too many people in Poland had C64s, and not too many people made games on C64s in the 21st century. But you can see this kind of coming back to the older equipment. I was thinking, because the basic intention of this panel suggests that there is such a thing as Eastern European game development, and that there is some sort of point in separating it from others. I don't think there is any point in saying Southern Polish game development. It's not a separate entity, and of course, at a time when game development is getting more and more globalized, I think it's also worth asking the question whether talking about Eastern European game development has any sense. Whether there is a point of putting these Eastern European developers in one bunch, treating them as a separate category. Do you think this category makes any sense or not? Are there any features that are distinct for video game developers from Bulgaria, Poland, Romania, or not really at this point? I suppose definitely. There was a time, to expand on that, there was a time when it was a very palpable category. right? Where these common experiences, these common problems with reaching other markets and so on, where it was important. Do you think it is still important right now?
Well, of course, we had different ways of working. We had different ways of reaching the audience, especially on the West. But I don't see at least my games as being different. I never sold my games as a games from Poland. Of course, if someone was interested and asked, I said, okay, this game was developed in Poland, and oh, it's great. And that was the end of the discussion, because they weren't interested in the game. So almost all of my games were sold everywhere, and as they were a part of global game markets. I didn't have maybe I didn't have good excuse to use my roots, the Polish roots, to market the game, so that was the reason. But we always targeted the global audience from the beginning, because that was the only chance to make this business, worthwhile, basically.
So from my perspective, there was a time, exactly what you said, when there was it's special like Eastern Europe, and now I have to put a difference, because I'm from Germany, so being a Western guy, but representing Wargaming, being an Eastern European company. So from my experience in the very first beginning, when I first got in touch with Eastern European games, was late 90s, something like this, on ECTS and especially on E3, when the first Eastern European publishers came on, like 1C, Buka, Akela, GamesFactory.ru, and so on and so on. And this was, at this time, interesting and different. The visual appearance of the games was different. Like, okay, there were games, especially military and strategic games, which were very highly accurate after the historic models. There were other titles. When I saw the first like fantasy or cartoonish games from Eastern Europe, I felt like a kind of color shock, to put it like this. But I think these days are gone long ago. And now from Wargaming perspective, okay, pretty sure in the very first, so Wargaming is becoming next year 20 years of age. So there was a life before World of Tanks. Yeah, in the beginning of the upcoming success, it was like we were the company from Belarus, meaning what the fuck? Where? First of all, where is it? Second, oh, last dictatorship in Europe. Hey, perfect. And you're doing stuff with tanks. Nice. Good. Second World War. Imagine what fun we had in Germany to promote the game. It was really interesting, to put it like this. The company's headquarters moved a couple of years ago to Cyprus. Yes, tax reasons once, but other reasons as well. And but we still have our core and our origin and our biggest office in Minsk in Belarus, with nearly 2,000 people over there. And nowadays, just as you said, we are approaching global audience. We are approaching everywhere. We have publishing offices all over the world in all different kinds of cultures and likewise. And it doesn't really matter where we are based and so on.
It's, if I may I'll let you speak in a moment, because an interesting thing for me about Wargaming and about World of Tanks is that it actually starts out as a very local project about the Russian view of the Second World War, right? It's also when you were talking about the Eastern European strategy games, or Russian strategy games, or Ukrainian strategy games, games like Blitzkrieg or Sudden Strike.
Blitzkrieg, Sudden Strike, Cossacks.
Yes. But Blitzkrieg and Sudden Strike, especially because the point of departure for them was the Great Home War, and the other subjects were sort of added as a matter of time. And if I remember rightly, in the world of tanks, at first it was the Soviets versus the Germans, basically, right? And then
No, it started with three nations.
with three nations, okay.
Soviets,
yes,
Germans, and Americans.
But of course, if you look at these
Sure
Eastern
thing.
European military games, the flight sims, also the point of departure is always the Soviet view of the war, which was not really that well known in the West, right? So it was a form of popularizing your local history, and then it moved on to something where this origin is not really recognizable.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely agreed. It's like if you take a look at Second World War and the winner states, the Allies, when the US guys think of it, they see the big, huge aircraft carriers and battleships. The English guys won the Battle of Britain with the Air Force, and Russia, Soviet Union is like, we have our tanks. And this was the basic idea about this. And they rolled with the tanks back to Berlin. And so this was the reason why World of Tanks was what it is now. And I don't know if this is already common or popular. When the guys from Wargaming, so Victor, his brother, and a couple of others decided one last try after, say, 12 to 15 normal boxed strategic games like the Massive Assault series, the Order of War series, and so on and so on. They definitely decided, okay, we need to make a big, huge online game now, and it's supposed to be free to play. But the first plans was orcs versus elves. So World of Tanks was with orcs in the beginning, until everybody saw, okay, World of Warcraft is like colorful as hell, but really good, and we don't get it, so let's stick to this, what we can do. And the decision fell, let's do something with tanks.
Okay.
So I would like to concur using an analogy. You know the German genre of Western movies. So at one point, the Germany produced
the East German, you know, the Winnetou
yeah, the
and,
Eastern
stuff.
yes.
Karl May.
Karl May stuff, huh?
So so the thing is, you can clearly differentiate Western movies from the actual, like, from Hollywood, from the German Western movies. I think, like, as it might not be visible from the inside, maybe like when we were back and like it was like 90s or the 80s and we watched them fresh, and they were like, hey, we got this cool Western movie and it's just like the American Western movies. But then when you look back at it, it's like, nope. I think it's the same. We're like, yeah, we're the same, and like, nope, we're not. It just might not be visible to us.
I have to concur with Tom. A couple of years ago, I mean, probably something like 10 years or more, you could tell if a game was done in Eastern Europe. East European games, especially Russian ones, were very impressive technically. Also, they were more hardcore. They were not necessarily as good in gameplay as American ones, but because they were very impressive technically, they could touch genres which are not popular, or they were done very poorly on most Western development houses. But today, I really can't tell when I play a game, unless I research it, if it's a company in Eastern Europe. I remember when I played Anomaly Warzone, it's not that the game is not special, it is, but I was really, really surprised it was done in Poland. I mean, it was so well done, and it was almost, in a sense, like a Hollywood blockbuster. I mean, it's a very simple game, but still, I was surprised that it made me kind of feel ashamed, because they did a simple game so well, I thought I could never do this. So polished, so, you know, I mean, it's not The Witcher, it's not a super production, right? So today I think we're in the same area as the rest of the world.
But I also have a feeling that for us in Poland that the changes started on our eastern border. So we felt, maybe it's our view, we felt that our games are not that different from the West. But those Russians, for example, they do stuff in completely different way, especially from the artistic point of view. We could simply point, okay, this is definitely a Russian game, because it looked different. But then I cannot tell. Nowadays they do the games the same way. I don't know really the reason why they do. Maybe it's post-communist trauma. I'm not convinced really, because for example, the best dystopian games comes from the West. We cannot do, for example, a good dystopian game.
That's where the dystopia is.
Yeah. Nowadays, yeah, they are building it. Of course, they don't realize it yet. So, where is that trauma? There is where is this post-apocalyptic, atmosphere? It's not. At least it's not present in our games. I think we will really struggle to create really good post-dystopian game here, because maybe it's too real for us.
This War of Mine is an example.
Yeah, to some extent. Yeah, maybe it's difficult for us to deal with these issues for some reason. I don't know why Americans need to do these games for us.
I think maybe with the opening of European Union and working markets, many East European developers work directly for West European companies. They come back, they publish games there. So it's culturally wise, it's no longer so separate. I mean, I have friends that used to work in Sweden, United States, and they came back to Romania and established a company, and you cannot look at their games and say this is Romanian or European in any way.
Okay, any other? Tom, you wanted to say something? No. Okay. Perhaps we'll move on to we'll come back to the possible differences and the question of subjects and the question of the influence of trauma perhaps later on. But now I'd like to move back into history, the kind of old soldiers' tales of what it was like in the old days of developing games. And I think all of you have these sort of tales to tell. Maciej, of course, Sos, who was one of the pioneers of the indie game movement in Poland. Tom, who was one of the pioneers in terms of creating big European RPGs, right? And a big European 3D RPG. This was quite an exotic thing at that time, and everybody was surprised that you were able to come up with something like this. Not quite Eastern European, but still, we'll let you talk. And Dan, who has a very interesting experience because before becoming a game developer, he was also a game critic and journalist in the 1990s in Romania. So you could also see a market, and you probably played it before you wrote about it, right? So you saw this emerging market in the Eastern European countries. So perhaps starting with Maciej, what was it like when you made your first game and you thought, oh, this is such a nice game, the protagonist looks like Robocop, let's sell it abroad?
Because we wanted more money, obviously. The game was quite successful in Poland alone, but at that time we wanted to... Everyone played the game. Obviously, that's what we want, really. We want people to play our games. So, but it was time before the digital distribution. So if you wanted to reach the global audience, you have to find partners, publishers, distributors, and stuff. And there was no internet, so you couldn't sell email asking for for anything, basically. So you had to use post office, especially Polish post office, who was awful at that moment. So it was really a kind of lottery. You put the disk into envelope and mail it and hope and pray for the best, because there was no chance that the package will reach your destination, would reach your destination at that time. We were fortunate enough that, for example, Epic got the package and was able to answer via email at that time, because it was starting to work, and we could reach wider audience. But it was a kind of gamble for both sides, because for them, the civilized world ended at the Polish western border, basically. So it was a kind of a country of white bears and people drinking vodka from the border towards east. So they didn't know where the Poland is, Romania, Belarus, and whatever. It was, here dragons lie, or something like that. So it took some time to get used to work with people from the east, and for us to learn how to contact them, how to meet them. It was, meeting was very difficult stuff to do because it was very, very costly for us at that time. It's still costly to go, to the States, for example, and just to talk with someone. But at that time, we had to really carefully plan where to meet with our partners. We need to know that it will be worthwhile. If we spend the money, we will basically strike the deal. So we had to be prepared. We had to agree to sometimes to not very good deal terms. But for us, it was the only chance to have our game published in the States, for example. So it was, of course, much, much more difficult. And you had to rely on the partners. You had to put, faith in them because you cannot help them in any way. You cannot verify them very often. So sometimes not all deals were really good for us. You cannot, for example, verify the sales and demand money. Legal stuff were beyond the reach. So, well, you signed the contract and hope for the best because in case of any trouble, you couldn't do anything, basically. So, well, I was fortunate enough that most of my deals were good enough, and again, the games were sold, and I got some extra money for that. But we were afraid with every deal. And founding was another matter. When the industry grew, we started to need more money. So we are totally dependent on the publishers, on the Western publishers. So finding those, convincing them that okay, it is a good idea to invest your money in some strange country with strange people is a good idea. So again, I was quite fortunate, but it was constant struggle.
Okay. So when I started working in the games industry, it was like developing some typical German PC games, economic simulations. Germany was well known for this within its boundaries. The rest of the world never ever got it. It's meant as a game. So imagine animated Excel sheets, something like this. And we had a lot of this, like the planner or das Amt, the office, and the vineyard, and all this stuff. Or to manage a computer games magazine. It was called MAG, so build up the editorial stuff and so on. So managing games, and oh God, it's incredible. Germans.
This is what you do for a living.
At this time, yes. Germans love this type of games, and this is just as an additional information, the reason why German development industry is really in between as East and West, because we had such a big, strong home market. Germany has a lot of people. They have a decent amount of money, so German game developers didn't need to develop for the rest of the world because there were enough players. And this is how we, for example, lost completely the development of consoles. Yeah, and nowadays there are only a couple of companies. So just to give an idea, from last year's numbers, which were published right now, of all of the total income of the German game of the German games market, just 6.7 or 6.8% of the money went to German developers. The rest is going to wargaming, to electronic arts, to whatever. Name any name, and these are not German companies. So the industry over there is struggling. But sorry about that. Back to economic simulations. We tried our very, very best to, at this time I was in a company called Greenwood Entertainment. And at this time we definitely wanted to make some more interesting games as well. Found an investor, of course a publishing company, European-based publisher, and they bought, I think, 60 to 70% of our company and gave us money to develop a couple of bigger games. One was a BattleTech clone without the official license, but with the whole rule set of the board game inside. And the other one was a kind of Mad Max-ish inside scenario, car driving and killing all the other car drivers and so on and so on. It was, by the way, one of the last games with a voxel engine. It was very interesting to work like this. But it was hilarious when you put a couple of mines on the floor and a crate was growing and growing. Great. Anyway, of course, this didn't work out very well. So the publisher closed the money flow. And we tried everything to get back on business, bought the rest of our company back, and were not allowed due to legal issues to have the company Greenwood. So we founded a couple of new companies. One of them was Piranha Bytes. And we started, and I was like smiling when you told your story. We started with 4 founders. 3 of them were unemployed and got money from the state. And only with 1 person, because of technical reasons, it was not possible. But this is how we started, and had a room, yeah, a little bit more like this, and had 3 external coders, students, and then we started working. Found a publisher, and the rest is somehow history. So this is how we began.
Just a comment here, because I think it's also quite interesting when you look at the first wave of the reception of Eastern European games is like, oh, these games are not so good technically, but they have strange subjects. They are strange in artistic terms, for instance, right? They are different in some way. This was what was going on in the late 1990s when the first Eastern games started reaching the West. When you move to the late 1980s, you will read the same things about French games. Oh, they are technically not very good, but they have this weirdness in them, and they are very strange. And when you move back to the early 1980s, you will hear that, or you will read that about British games, right? So it's interesting how this wave is sort of moving, and I think Gothic is an interesting example. It's a Western German game, but at the point when there had already been at least several German hits, like the Settlers and so on, but it's still you still got to be the weird ones in a way, right? Probably the last ones in your country.
And we were very, very proud of this.
Yes,
we were the weird ones. Yeah, definitely. And this was absolutely our approach. We wanted to make something different, not Lord of the Rings high-class fantasy or high fantasy with elves and dwarves and hugging trees. And likewise, we wanted to make. Our studio was based in the western part of Germany, so big industrial area where football clubs like Borussia Dortmund or Schalke are coming from, and so it's a coal mining and steel area. So this is where we are from, meaning we love to drink beer, we love to kick our asses, we love to go to the stadium, and we are, say, like a little bit more direct, not so diplomatic, and this is the kind of game we wanted to create. We all, the founders of Piranha Bytes, were role-playing enthusiasts, and it doesn't matter if it's pen and paper from the very first beginning, or the role-playing games on PC, or in some cases even live adventure role-playing games. I love to run through the woods in a nice fancy fantasy costume and hit with my latex sword orcs and likewise. So this was really fun. And yeah, this is how we start. And we wanted to make something more lifelike. So dirty fantasy, to put it like this. So you're thrown into a prison world, and what's the first thing you see? The fist hitting your nose. That's it, Gothic.
Yeah, we didn't have the games, local games market. In Romania, it was all piracy. And to be honest, even today, if you make a game for the Romanian market, I don't think you'll succeed. I mean, I don't think we sold 1,000 copies of Door Kickers in Romania, and that includes all our developer friends who buy our game because they're enthusiastic about supporting us. And Romanian public is mostly, you know, when they saw the announcement of Door Kickers, oh, we're doing a game in Romania and it's got crap graphics. Yeah, okay. So as a developer, you don't get very enthusiastic about these kind of remarks. But to be honest, we knew that we made it big when the game appeared on file lists and torrent sites. So, and Romanians became interested in pirating it, then it was a confirmation of our value. But other than that, there was absolutely no money to support local developers. Back then, I think the earliest game studio was probably Ubisoft, who, if I remember correctly, started because a huge biker from Romania was on a train to the seaside and met with the Gilmore brothers, totally by accident. And there was probably some alcohol involved, and they gave him some money to establish the local studio. Yeah, and there's a long history afterwards. I came to Ubisoft much later. And the earlier indie games I remember were all kind of clones of Warcraft or Warcraft 2. One of them was actually published. It was done by my old lead designer from Silent Hunter 3 era, Tiberius Lazar. It was a game called Rival Realms, and I think it was published by Digital Integration in the UK. But I have no idea how that happened. I actually sent him an email to ask him just that, and he probably replied, but I haven't looked at it. But the thing is, back then, when I was a journalist for a Romanian game magazine, I didn't know about Rival Realms. Nobody knew about other. There are developers in Romania. So at some point, I made a feature about Romanian game developers, and kind of had to do detective work and find guys that were developing stuff. And none of those games made it to the market. I mean, yeah, I went to the Ubisoft studio and talked to them, and okay, they were different. But for example, there was this Total Annihilation kind of game called No Name War. Those guys are still in the market, but they are outsourcing, doing outsourcing work for big games. They're called AMC Studio. And there was another game which was with a heavy local theme of Dacians and Romans and everything. It was called Zamolxis, God or Emperor. Again, a clone of Dune, probably not in all senses, but of Dune of Warcraft. It was lost, but the guys, you can find them as developers working even today. So it was a time of trying to do the games that you like, but with no money involved, or money from book publishing houses, which comes and goes depending on what the owner drinks in the morning. For example, there was this company FunLabs who were trying to do Half-Life, basically because the guy that established the company dreamed about doing Half-Life because he liked Half-Life very much. So he got his suit and went to E3, and then went there and why did I bring my suit? Because it's not that kind of environment, and came back with a contract to do outsource for Activision. And I went to FunLabs and we did the Rainbow Six clone, which is actually totally different and not that good. Secret Service in harm's way. And also I remember when he came back with a contract from Activision, it was from Activision Value, which is the budget section of Activision. And he admitted something like, yeah, they gave us some money, I don't know why. Because it was not a huge amount of money. And actually, I remember when we did Silent Hunter 4, and we had to pitch it to Yves Guillemot and the other top brass in Ubisoft. At some point, when on a kickoff meeting, when you present, this is our gameplay and this we're gonna do it, at the end you have like the financial stuff. We need this amount of money, and at that point, I think it was the big financial boss of Ubisoft, which is actually a woman, Kristen. She, looked at the other guys and you got me into this for just €1 million. It's whatever, and she kind of signed it, and yeah. So that's the specific of early days in Romania.
Okay, and Sos.
So I guess I'm the youngest. I got into it the latest. So when I started, I was making Flash games. It was the Flash game period when everybody was making Flash games, and the Flash industry was working this way that you make a game that's a Flash game. It's usually you don't put much effort into it because the amount of effort you put is never proportional to the money you can get. So you can get like a bag of money for a game you made in 2 days, but you might get nothing for a game that you worked for a year for. So I would make my first game was like made in a month and a half, and you get sponsorships. So you kind of sell it to Flash websites like Congregate, Newgrounds, Armor Games. I guess most of them are already dead because Flash doesn't work in browsers anymore. And they would like, hey, if they like it, they would ask you to brand it. So you get a sponsorship deal, which is you put the logos in front of the games, like a publisher logo. You put the logos and links to their website everywhere, and it spreads across the internet with links to back to the website. And they would pay things like, for my first game, I got $8,000, which is a lot of money in Polish. So the thing is that at that time, it was like 2011, and at that time, the dollar was 3 Polish zlotys. And 3 Polish zlotys is kind of worth $3 in Poland because everything is cheaper. So you get like the amount of money you get is 3 times as much. The other thing with Flash games is that you don't sign the deal. It's all under the table. So you write an email and you're like, hey, do you want this? And he's like, hey, I want this. You do this for me and you send me the bill and I will send you like PayPal you $8,000. And you do that and there's like not a single signature needed, and it works. And it worked, and this is how I got started. This is how I got like funded for making my first game, first big game, which is MacPixel. That took a year, and then when I was releasing MacPixel from Poland, it was kind of weird tax situation because I was selling it without a shop because Steam wasn't open back then. For indie game developers, GOG was not really accepting things, and the only way was like for me to code my own online shop. So I got through all of this like looking for publisher and having the digital. I had the advantage of being able to distribute digital, but then it was trouble because it was the beginning here, and I had to do all of this myself. But then in the end, I got more Polish zlotys because Polish zloty is kind of worth more. So this is how I began. But before me, there were people like Michał Marcinkowski, MM, which is kind of a legend, an indie legend, who made Soldat. You might have heard of that, and King's Arthur Gold. So Soldat was one of the first. I don't really know his full experience of that. It's a shame he couldn't be here. But he made Soldat back in the beginning of 2000s, and that was a game aimed. It was not aimed for our market. It was the same with my games. Like you don't make games. What you said is like the market here didn't exist. I remember in the beginning when I was like Marek Czarniak, who just was walking past this way, asked me, "Hey, do you want to participate in a panel in ZTG?" That was like Zjazd Twórców Gier in Poznań. About create and like tell people about making your game and putting it on Steam, and I was like talking about putting my game on Steam, and then I saw people making these weird faces. It was like 2012, and I was like, "Hey guys, do you actually know what Steam is?" And they were like, "Who knows what Steam is?" And I got seen like 2 hands up. And like, okay, do you know what Pirate Bay is? And everybody was like, yeah, okay. So I got like, everybody was hands up. And I'm like, okay, so imagine Steam is like the Pirate Bay, but you have to pay money. And they were like, what? So you didn't make money. You didn't want to make indie games like as at the very beginning. The same at the very end. You don't make games for these markets, even though Steam and actually buying games is now popular in Poland and I guess in the rest of Eastern Europe as well. But at the beginning, it was the same with Michał Marcinkowski, who made Soldat, and it was kind of one of the first alpha-funded games. It wasn't Polish people who paid money for this. It was people from abroad. So we make things for other people to enjoy using our kind of like influence.
Yes, and it was, I would say, Soldat was an absolute anomaly in Poland. I mean, it was, you couldn't really compare it to anything else, because the usual model, in many cases, not in all cases, because I think with Maciej, it's interesting how, when you worked in the Talion, how you were aiming your games at the Western audience from the very start, including hiring an Australian writer, which was the first case in Poland. Where you would where a game developer would hire a foreign writer, but with Michał, it was like, you know, he didn't even consider the local audience, and the usual practice would be first you test it on a local audience, just like it works in most Eastern European film companies right now. First you test it on a local audience, and then you export it if it works really well and you think it could work abroad. And Michał didn't really think at all about the local audience. It was a complete reversal of the paradigm. He didn't think about selling his game in a box, which was still quite surprising at that time. So yes, a really
Actually, for him, this wasn't even commercial project. He was surprised that people want to pay for the game, because he was very young. It was at the end of high school, so he simply did this game because he wanted to create the game. And that was his goal, and then he learned that people not only play the game, they like the game everywhere, and they want to pay for the game. So he was quite surprised by it. But hey, if you want to pay, I'm happy with that, and that's the rest is history.
Yeah, when I was that age, I was like, why would you want money for making these games? Like, why would you do that? Why would you pay money? Who would pay money for you? Like, all of this is free on the internet. I can just download it. It was the time that they didn't like crack down on the website that distributed games, so you could just download all of the games, even the commercial ones, for free on the internet, not even using like peer-to-peer networks. So like, why would you want to make money like if nobody really wants to pay for it, right? But in the West, it was different. People were actually paying for them.
And I think that it's interesting because first of all, in your history, so to say, I think it was a very rapid change. I mean, when you were starting to sell MacPixel, it was crazy that you could sell something like that, and then 2 years later, it was quite normal. And this is, I think, a place where these regional differences didn't matter any longer, because basically it's not just your history, but it's the history of the global indie market, right? Of which MacPixel is one of the pioneers. So this is a place where these Easterness or Westernness doesn't play any role. Even I think in the most important aspect, an aspect which I think is still alive, the economic aspect, right? Because even if the games are different, are not very much different thematically, even if they're not very much different in terms of the technical quality, there is the economic thing, right? The wages, the promotion, and so on. And the indie market was interesting in the sense that it didn't matter, right? There was this global community of makers of free games, and these free games suddenly started to be profitable, and it happened all over the place. If we could move on to skipping perhaps some of the original questions that I sent to you, but we still have half an hour left, and I think we still have to have some room for questions from the audience. Let's talk about today for a moment. Yes, you wanted to talk about today.
I actually had a remark.
Yeah, sure.
But if you want to introduce that, So I think like when we started talking about like aiming the games for foreign markets, and that's present even now, and I guess even more because we have more access to that, is that when you make a game that is not for here, you need to be mindful of not only the language as like getting a writer or translator, but also the culture. So for example, we have things here that are totally alien to people from abroad. So for example, one of the things might be it's actually present in San Francisco, but like I guess that's the only Western country that have electric buses. We have electric buses in Poland, or like the architecture. People from Western, you know DayZ, the game DayZ? It's kind of popular. It's made in Czech Republic, and people always make fun of the architecture of the DayZ because they have this, you know, the blocks of flats that are omnipresent everywhere in the Eastern Bloc, and they are not present anywhere else in the world except for like the post-communist places.
And City 17 in Half-Life 2.
Yeah. And things like that. So when you're developing, now I'm making a game called Mosh Pit Simulator, and I'm building a town because it's a game about destroying stuff, and I want a town that you can destroy. But I don't want to build a town like Warsaw or like Poznan in my hometown or like any other European town. I was actually like going to Google Maps and scanning all the American towns to make it feel like America, because this is my target market, and this is the target market of all of us. We don't want to export locally, we want to go to the west. The further west, the better, because Americans are pretty much the biggest reception market for all of the games.
Mm-hmm. And I think this is a good starting point, because of course this is one of the issues in Central and Eastern European game development. Do we introduce local elements, or do we avoid them? And I think until quite recently, introducing too many local elements was a big no, right? You would have to aim for the global market rather than, well, not the global market, the American market first of all, and then perhaps the rest of the globe following the American example. But then with games like, for example, The Witcher to a certain extent, or to an even lesser extent, but still, This War of Mine, right? Which takes this Central European or gives this Central European flavor. So, what would be your attitude towards introducing these local elements? I think I'd like to start with well, Sos has already spoken on that. I'd like to start with Maciej, and if we can go back to the work on the first Witcher, because the first Witcher is it's quite interesting to trace the history of the approach towards these local elements in the whole series. In the first, you have quite a lot of them. Then the second one is very careful to avoid them, and then the third one really revels in them and is very happy about introducing them. I was always, thinking to what extent it was a very conscious decision. I would have conversation with Marcin Blacha about these local elements, and Marcin would always answer, we had very little time and we had to come up with something, so we did that. To what extent was introducing these elements? I mean, of course, some elements are obvious, some elements are taken from Sapkowski, right? But there is more than that. There is quite a lot of architecture, quite a lot of folklore, quite a lot of Polish romantic poetry, for instance, introduced on many levels. To what extent, when you and CD Projekt were working on the first Witcher, was it a conscious decision to?
I really don't remember. It was 12 years ago or something, but I believe Martin mentioned this on the previous panel, that we were simply too ignorant to do this properly or to consider all those cultural differences. So we do what we really wanted to do. And this is something I like at least in Polish games or Eastern European games, that we sometimes do stuff because we feel to do this. It doesn't pay off very often. So you have to be very, very careful with that, especially if you are targeting US market. For my recent game is a good example, the Beat Cup, because this game is very, very politically incorrect. And because this is how we, at least in Poland, do stuff, tell stuff, and think. And this is not very welcome in the US, especially Polish policemen actually like the game very much. The audience likes the game very much, but the press, especially the press from the West Coast, it wasn't welcome. To the extent that they decided to simply ignore the game, not only bash it in the reviews, but simply not tell anything about the game, which was quite surprised because the game is published by a pretty well-known publisher, 11-bit Studios. They put a lot of effort into marketing the game, and really everyone know about the game. But still, the games approaches some, very sensitive themes, and press decided not to talk about this game. So, and
but
we
the game takes place in an American city.
yes.
So it's not here in Warsaw.
No, but we didn't approach this with the, required attitude, basically. So it's too racist, it's too homophobic. The game it takes place in 80s, so we tried to bring the atmosphere of the 80s. It was like that at that time. But again, it wasn't welcome. It was, at this place in the American culture, it's not a good idea to tackle if you want to get good press, because again, players like the game. It's not a matter that we started to offend everyone in the States. We started to offend very influential people. That's the problem. So sometimes if you start to make a game like you feel it, it may be not a very good decision in terms of sales, for example. But I like this in Polish games because we want to experiment with act impulsively. We want to do stuff because we want to make great games, and most of us are really indie developers, so we can afford to do this because there's not much money at stakes. Most of the time it's our personal money on stake. So okay, we can afford to lose it because it's our money. But if you are a big company, if you have shareholders, you have to be very careful. So you have to learn how to do the game in the proper way, basically, because there's too much at stake. And that's, but on the other hand, the project and The Witcher 3 proved that if you are bold enough, if you have a strong backing from your basic audience, because they have a huge fan base, and if you do the game at the highest level, you will overcome all obstacles. You will overcome the stupid Polygon articles about not having black people in the medieval fantasy games taking place in basically Eastern Europe. So but if you someone in the middle, you have to be very careful what you do.
Yeah, absolutely agreed from my side. For example, with Gothic, one part Gothic, one part World of Tanks. With Gothic, we had a nice collection of age rating stuff from especially the English-speaking territories. So let's see if I can recall them. Sexual explicit content, nudity, drug abuse, violence, explicit language, alcohol. Did I forget some? No, I'm not. Political incorrectness, yes, of course, and with everything. So the game was a huge success in German territories, in Eastern European territories, and we were ignored in the US, banned in Australia, which was achievement unlocked. And it was fun. We made the game like we wanted it. Yeah. And we put a nice band into the game with In Extremo, a concert, and so on and so on. So this was our part. Regarding what you said about bigger companies, Wargaming nowadays is a big company. We have to be extremely careful in all different territories. Just as an example, when we launched World of Warships, we had issues in the Korean territory because for the Japanese ships, the Japanese line, we used the Japanese war flag, and in Korea it's a total no-go, like a swastika is in Germany nowadays. Yeah? So we were not this aware of this, and so we had to do some stuff. We had a couple of years ago a lot of problems with the Polish community because there were inscriptions on the Russian tanks with like greetings from Joseph Stalin or what the fuck ever, which was historical correct, but not very well perceived here in Poland, obviously. Of course, all the time we have to be extremely careful in Germany because all kinds of Nazi-like insignia are completely forbidden by law, and so it has to be very, very careful. Different cultures, different areas, different parts of the world, and all need different approaches. Just as another example, going from a different angle now, World of Tanks, warplanes, and warships is like historical correct, meaning we have the tanks and the other vehicles as they were in the time of the last century, including because of the sheer number of vehicles, we use some prototypes or some blueprints and create vehicles from this. Okay, but for example, Chinese market demands something completely different. The only territory where we have a golden tank is in China. Like, what the fuck? You're playing a tank game. You are playing in hide and seek. You are hiding in bushes. And you don't want to be seen from your enemies. You want to shoot them first. And then you have a gold fucking tank? What the hell is happening? Yeah, but this is how it is.
If I can intervene, that reminds me of what you said, and what you said reminds me of, you know, Hatred, the game by Destructive Creations, which is, so Hatred is a game about killing people. You're a killer, you have no motive, you just want to kill people. And it was perceived as racist, because if you can kill, the goal is to kill everyone. But it was perceived as, like, reviewed as racist, because if you can kill everyone, you can choose to only kill black people or something. So you can't please everyone ever.
I always said that you should do whatever you know best and makes you tick, and then the quality of your work will be better. So if, for example, for us, or for you as an East European developer, there is something which comes from your upbringing or from where you grew up that you can put in games, it will probably feel different and better done. I remember when I was working on some kind of crap shooters for the first company I was hired, and we did a Saxon village, a Saxon-style village, as a level for a 3D shooter. It was not the best game, but the level definitely felt different, and it was the kind of scenery that I visited a lot as a kid and liked a lot, and so I could make it different. I think it's the same when you look at the early Bohemia Interactive games. I remember playing the first Operation Flashpoint, and when you went there, and, it didn't feel like any other shooter from the American or Western European companies. It didn't feel the same, especially because of the viewing distances, open world nature of the game, but also because the architecture was definitely different, and it transported you to a different kind of location, right? So it worked very well because they chose to portray their kind of environment and gambled on that. If you think of Romania, probably some of the things foreigners know are like vampires and communists. And vampires are not really Romanian, but, well, somebody made a movie about it, or a book actually. And even if you go in Romania at the supposed Dracula's castle, you will find all kinds of vampire bullshit over there. I guess it sells. We Romanians hate it. But the thing is, where I'm trying to get is that I have some friends that did a silly iOS game with a vampire, and it didn't sell, right? I have some friends who did not so silly communist-inspired game, which is called Black the Fall. It didn't sell either, and it was a kind of high-profile game, and it's one of the most surprising failures for me because it had a kind of unique touch, and it got lots of press, especially because of the communist vibe in it. I don't know if it was well done or not, but the thing is, the press was kind of positive about it. It got a lot of press and it didn't sell. So just because the press didn't like BitCop, well, fuck them. Yeah. I hope it sells though.
Yeah, it's.
I bought it,
well.
so yeah, but I didn't get to play it. Yeah. Yeah, so I think you should stick to what you know, and the game will come, well, I don't know, better.
Okay, we have 15 minutes left, which means that I think if any members of the audience have their questions, you can. Oh, okay.
Sorry for cutting the questions. Yeah, I just wanted to say that for the first time, though, I saw a Romanian game that actually it has some Slavic or Eastern European folklore in it. It's called Yaga. It's not out yet, but I was very surprised because there are some guys that never did a game before, a computer game before, and it's well done. I got to play it in development version. So if you look for Yaga, as in Baba Yaga, you know, on YouTube, and you find the trailers, US people from Poland, you probably recognize a lot of cliches from folk tales that you read as a kid. And it's well done, and in the game it's actually better, so it definitely can work, you know.
Okay, so do we have any questions from the audience? Right. Okay.
Okay, we've talked a lot about Western game development, and I think when we are talking about Western game development, we think big 3A companies, studios, and I think that's the difference. Not only culture difference, but that we think about Ubisoft, BioWare, big studios. And here in the Eastern Europe, we have little indie studios, independent studios, and they are brave enough to make new ideas, to employ local products, local elements. So I think that's the point. That's the strength and power of little studios. And I think that's. Oh, I forgot. I wrote it down.
But it's an interesting point, I think, because of course we have these. Wargaming would be, I think, an exception. Wargaming is this huge company spreading like a proper multinational company. But even perhaps not today, but even if you look at the earlier CD project, it basically worked like an indie company trying to make a AAA game, and not really knowing how to do that, and then
you know the concept of not knowing how to do that, it may be a strength for many, especially new studios. The example you gave, people are doing sometimes games with strange themes, with local themes, because they don't know that this is maybe not a good idea. No, those guys you mentioned, Baba Yaga game, yeah, because you know. Maybe they don't have enough experience of making and selling games, so let's make a game Baba Yaga because it's a good idea, and sometimes such games succeed, at least add to the pool of interesting concept for the games. And we have a lot of similar studios here in Poland which are really trying to do different stuff because they don't know that it's a good idea, because we first act and then we think. And then we observe the results, basically. So, on the other hand, I think the Western market, there's a much more education about how to make the games, how to market. So people need to invest more money because the salaries are higher. So they really think before they start to do stuff. We do, and then we observe the results.
Agree. Most likely, totally agree. When I started, there was no education, so we made all our mistakes by ourselves, and I can't even tell you how true it is what you said. If we would have known what to expect before starting the development of Gothic, we never ever would have made this game. Never ever, no way, absolutely no way. Just as one small example, I think it was about approximately three and a half months before the release, before the final release, of a development time of 3.5 years. I was on an unofficial press tour, visiting some befriended games journalists, and showed them what we have and said, okay, in approximately 3 months we want to come out. So please, off the record, and here's a lot of beer and booze, off the records, what do you really think? And it was like, okay, nice, but the rest of the world definitely wants to have mouse control. Oh, really? Oops. And if you ever ask yourself why the controls of Gothic, the Gothic series and the Risen series, and hopefully not Elex, are so shitty, then this is the reason, because we used the last 3 months of the development time to implement mouse control. We were totally convinced that it's the best and most brilliant idea we ever had. Just 10 keys on the keyboard, and that's it. And that should control everything in the whole game. We were totally convinced. The rest of the world was not.
And have you heard about History of Korinis, the new project from Poland?
I did.
What? History of Colonies?
History of Korinis, a fan project.
No, I haven't heard of.
Yeah, I did. I heard of it.
Okay, there was another question. Or did you want to add something?
I wanted to add something, sorry.
Sure.
I'll be just short. I want to say that I think there are 7,000 people working in the games industry in Romania. So it's not just small. Yeah, I think most of them are QA, were very professional. But also when I worked for Ubisoft, and there's a similar experiences in local EA studios or Gameloft, they are kind of also doing AAA. The thing is, I don't think Romania can do a proper AAA with just local leadership, because we kind of have a deficit of middle management, proper middle management. We have excellent programmers, we have good artists. There is an issue with the artists maybe, because they're not always adapted to game graphics. But the management is really missing. So the know-how, how to make the little bits come into a great project. So many times there were titles that would come to the studio and they would do it from the start to the finish, and the result was maybe not up to Western standards. I think this will be corrected at some point in the future, but don't think there are no tries to do AAA in Romania. Yeah.
My question is maybe related to what you said, because my question is, you talked about the differences between Eastern and Western game development, about economics, the wages, etc., some sort of boldness. But is from your experience, do you see a difference in the company structure, the ways of working? Because from my knowledge, on the top, in the boards of big companies, there are people that are no longer have any relation to the gaming. They are not gamers themselves. They are just members of the board. They do business. And from your experience, is because here in Poland we have a few companies that have shareholders. They are on the stock market. Yeah, so they have similar principles, similar goals as AAA companies. And are the structures different? Are the ways of working, how projects are managed here in Eastern Europe, is it different?
Okay, from my perspective, first of all, yes, I went in 2000 with the company on the stock market in this .com bubble, new market in Germany, NASDAQ in the US, and so on and so on. And the company changed after this immediately. Like you had the feeling you were only working for your monthly or quarterly report and so on, and everything for the shareholders, and present brilliant numbers and figures and likewise. So from my personal perspective, never ever again on this. And I totally agree what you said. This is especially in the bigger Western publishing companies the case. There was even in the early 2000er years, early middle 2000er years, kind of really sport to find top level managers from other industries, from totally different than the gaming or even the entertainment industry, to bring new cultures into this gaming company. In most cases, it didn't work out pretty good. And in my personal opinion, but this is just Tom personal, you have to love games to make good games. Full stop. And regarding wargaming, yes, of course, the company changed as well. I joined Wargaming in May 2011, so 6.5 years ago. At this time, Wargaming was 200 people, 180 of them in Minsk, and of this 180, approximately 140 developers. Now we have 4,400 people in, I don't know, 19, 20 offices, Konrad? Something like this, huh? But still privately held, still no foreign capital or money in the company, no shareholders, and our CEO is playing on a daily basis and is still involved in the process and still a big, huge fan of games and everything. And this is something that makes us different from other big companies, and I like this.
I think we have to finish at this point because the people are already waiting for the next panel. So I'd like to thank all the panelists. Thank you very much. And if you have additional questions, I suppose you can catch these guys somewhere in